Welcome to Tied to the Moon, a podcast about yearning and learning to dance with the rhythms of the universe. Episodes drop on the new moon and the full moon. My name is Kate Lawrence and I'm your host, and this is the very first fledgling, delicate, tentative foray into the world for this work, this creation, this offering of sorts. I hold it gently in my hands, with few expectations of its value, but a healthy respect for its role as the place of beginning. And I'm going to force myself to stand tall after I press publish, to look you in the eye and remind myself, thanks to Theodore Roosevelt and Brene Brown, that I am in the arena, and that is what counts. Some people have a way of holding memories of me that I'm not altogether comfortable with. At a family dinner not very long ago, my 30-year-old niece said loudly, "You always gave the best presents, Auntie Katie." I puffed up slightly, sitting as I was next to my sister and thinking I was about to outshine her for a moment. "Remember the Christmas you gave me mice?" Oh. A dim and dull, painful memory awakes. Mice? Did I really give a small child mice? Not a puppy or a kitten or even fish, but vermin. Yeah, they were white vermin, but vermin. As I remember it, my niece was excited. Her parents gave me murderous looks, and I waved happily goodbye as the mice and the whole family headed off to their new home. A few days later, my niece stopped liking them. "Yeah, one of them bit me," the adult niece laughs as she shares this further horror with the table. And before that long ago New Year had even begun, the mice came back to me, as smelly and pink-eyed as when they'd left. Luckily, the shop was willing to take them back, and luckier still, they're cheap because I did not get a refund. And not for the first time, I wished people didn't remember things that I'd done. Another example comes from just a few years ago when my teenage son and I walked up Mount Macedon, a beautiful 600-metre climb from our house through eucalypt forests, tree fern gullies and congregations of grass trees on the cooler southern slopes of the range. I was so impressed with myself and enamoured of the task that I declared I would make it my routine to walk up the mount every week. My error was that I made this declaration in the presence of my 15-year-old son. He was quick to pour his scornful doubt on my vision, and unfortunately he was proved right, as I haven't actually walked up Mount Macedon since then. And he likes to remind me of this whenever I make a commitment to a new action or a pattern or a routine, which is what he did when I told him 2 weeks ago that from now on I was going to make Sunday a day of rest and relaxation. Is that before or after you walk up Mount Macedon? Years ago, I met a woman who had had a very difficult childhood and a chaotic and drama-filled adult life. She'd escaped a violent relationship, struggled to look after her 2 children to the point that one of them was in state care. And then she found, or was found by, God. She joined a church, an evangelical, born-again, Hillsong-type church, and that church was the grounding, supportive and secure community that saved her. I am not religious, and the foundations of her church are opposed to every fibre in my being. Yet I envied her, the belonging that she felt. I envied her Sundays that had a purpose and a rhythm. There was community, singing, sharing of food, and a cessation of the normals of life, of work, shopping, cleaning, any and all tasking, and the myriad ways I make myself a hamster on the spinning wheel of life. I envied the routine of attending a weekly service where life was contemplated, morals sharpened and stories remembered. As a person prone to living a pretty unstructured and chaotic life, I've never been a big rap for order, routines, habits, customs, definitely not rules or regulations. Yet I yearn for a container of rhythms and rituals within which to be chaotic. But I don't want a formula. I don't want to be controlled or dominated by dogma. I don't want strictures or scripture. I want and believe in the paradox of freedom within order. But I can also see how I, and perhaps many others, have let the baby slide out as we tipped the churchy, wet bathwater down the drain. I have vague and fond memories of Sundays from my childhood. They weren't much, really. Mum dragged us all to church and Sunday school, and the rest of the day was slow, usually dull, and nearly always boring. But in some ways, it's this boredom that I'm longing for, this slowing of time, this drawing down to presence with no agenda and a forced halting of the future. But there is absolutely no way that I will ever join the institution of a religion, the hierarchy of a church, the patriarchy of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. So over the years, I have sporadically tried to find, join, connect, or create a place to replicate this ideal, to fulfill my deep and repetitive yearning for the soothing rhythms of routines, the power of community and belonging, the rituals and reflections of the sacred within the secular, an examined life, a reverent life, a shared connection to place and liminal space. Some things I tried were good, even great. Some I did for a while. Some even embedded themselves in my deep memory and have come to the fore in times of crisis. But few, if any, have held their form or their hold on my daily or weekly life. I started a women's circle in my shed, and that kept its shape and power for a full 18 months. It held me through the diagnosis and death of my partner. Then, just as it formed, it dissolved. And I've read with joy and envy many books by folks who seem to speak my language. They extol the virtues and veracity of how such life-serving practices can be done in a secular way, of how they do it in their family or their community. But it always seems so particular, so personal, so dependent on an intact family or dumb luck location or the extroversion of the writer or belonging to some kind of institution. And it seems unattainable, the stuff of fairy tales. Yet my sense that this is the way I want to live deepens when I read, and my yearning swells and this dissatisfaction seeps into my bones. I hide behind my introversion, my social awkwardness and terror. I make the classic and fatal error of comparing myself with an ideal in a book, and I always come up short. So I try again to do something to take me closer to the ideal, but the impetus meets my isolation and I stumble, falter, and stop not long after. Occasionally, something blossoms for a while, and I hope to revisit some of my previous efforts in later episodes. But failure has never been a reason to stop trying. It is the only way to keep learning and discerning what is really wanted and what needs to happen. And so another spark of inspiration has arrived recently and created the genesis for this project. A few weeks ago, I listened to an episode of a podcast called Shelter in Place. The episode is called Letting in the Light, and I highly recommend you listen to it, and I'll put a link in the show notes. It was published in October 2021. It tells the story of Nikki, who moves to a new city. She doesn't know anyone. She lives in a share house that feels a bit like a bus stop until she moves into another share house that feels friendly. One Friday night, when Nikki's heading out for the evening, she steps into the lounge room and is totally affected by the atmosphere. It's a mixture of the visuals, there's dim lighting and candles, and something else she couldn't put her finger on. Something like a deep sense of peace, or, as she says, a feeling of love and quiet and security. The room had been set up by Jake, one of Nikki's new housemates, to honour Shabbat, the Jewish Sabbath. And the rest of the episode explores Jake and his approach to Shabbat and Nikki's deepening understanding and connection to this weekly practice of a day of rest, ritual and renewal. And it again taps the longing in me, the yearning I can't shake or satisfy, hangs around in my psyche just below the surface over the coming days, and I wonder what it would be like. And could I make it happen? This idea of a day of rest, one day a week. So, of course, I do a bit of Googling to see what people do on a secular Sabbath, and I come across the Sabbath Manifesto. I read through the list of 10 things, which all sound pretty good and reasonable, things like no technology, get outside, connect with loved ones, etc., etc. And then I reach one thing on that list that really tickles my fancy. It's deeply indulgent and thrilling. The commandment is to drink wine. Now, maybe you're thinking that isn't the level of sacredness that I ought to be aspiring to, but who am I to argue with the ancestors? The decision is made. I'm going to give it a crack. So the following Sunday, which was 2 weeks ago, I begin. Now, I don't start the day with a couple of glasses of wine, but instead with my usual coffee, some journaling, bit of wordplay. I walk my dogs and swim in the local reservoir, and in the early afternoon head to Melbourne to act in an amateur radio drama a friend is making, which is loads of fun. In the late afternoon, I lie on the couch and read for a bit, and then I sit up. And there's an instant of idle, a split second of stasis, a tarrying of time, and on the couch of calm, and into the breach, a thought rushes in. I want to write about this. I need to make sense of this. I need something or someone to bear witness. I need to be accountable. And maybe, just maybe, I might find others doing the same. For a moment, I imagine a blog, and in the very next breath, I realise it must be a podcast. I am, after all, a self-declared audio producer. And with that, my moment of nothing became nothing. Excitations fire around my mind, and I suddenly make a move towards the banned computer. But the urge is mild and easy to resist. I slump back to lie on the couch, my body still as my mind fills with imaginings of this new project. But there's plenty of time. So here I am at the end of the first episode of this podcast, Tied to the Moon, which I intend to be a wide-roaming record of ideas and stories and even poems. Keep listening to the end, as I attempt to close the gap between what I believe in and want to live as true and what I actually do in my day-to-day life. I'm going to chronicle my attempts to be intentional and experience a life connected to the cycles of the earth, the moon, and maybe even the cosmos. And to also dance with the arrhythmia, randomness, chaos of the cosmos. which I was recently reminded are just as much a part of the balance of life as regular rhythms of seasons and lunar cycles. I learned recently that the phenomenon of the polar lights, for us the aurora australis, are not tied to seasons on Earth as I had thought, but are caused by solar flares on the sun and the electromagnetic fields that result. And those solar flares happen anytime, any which way, no rhyme or reason that we know of anyway. So until next time, when the moon is full, may your life be sacred. Thanks for listening to Tied to the Moon. If you like this podcast, please rate and review us on iTunes or wherever you listen, and tell other people about it. And if you have any ideas or suggestions or requests, comments or feedback, I would love to hear from you. This podcast is made on the lands of the Gunung Willumbullock at the foot of Mount Macedon, 65 kilometres north of Melbourne, Australia. This podcast is a production of Storyground and me, Kate Lawrence. The moon tugs ever so gently, like the hand of a small child or the wisdom of an old woman, returning and returning and returning, sounding with the sea and the wombs of the world, swinging and swaying, steady in the dance, standing ground in the light. Her role is clear. Her time is always now, returning and returning and returning.